Continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by The Mortgage Update with Dan Frio. Every Saturday morning at 7 on AM 560, The Answer.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
How would I look walking a dog on the White House lawn?
But I was trying to think who had a cat.
Socks. The Clintons had Socks the cat.
On AM 560.
Well, to be fair, the Clintons also did have a bitch in the White House.
Hey-o.
The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Peter Thiel, the billionaire tech investor, sat down with an interview by the always probing former Reagan speechwriter Peter Robinson. And they talked a little bit about Trump in 2020, since Thiel's been such an outspoken proponent of Trump, and not to mention critic of some of Trump's biggest critics in big tech in Silicon Valley. But Peter Thiel had a warning about the socialists.
The socialists are, not to be underestimated. There's a Marxist theory that the time for communism would come when interest rates went to zero, because the 0% interest rate was a sign that the capitalists no longer had any idea what to do with their money, and therefore there were no good investments left. That's why the rates are zero, and therefore all that you could do at that point was redistribute the capital. And so it doesn't mean 0% rates lead us to socialism, but it is always something that I find it alarming that the rates are as low as they are.
Last question about Donald Trump. Do you expect to endorse him?
Yes, I certainly will not endorse any of his opponents.
All right.
Interesting invocation of Marx's theory about interest rates there. I think that's relevant part of the discussion, but certainly when you have presidential candidates now, admittedly, one is a former presidential candidate, Warren Wilhelm, who bowed out this morning, who has provided the definitive statement for the socialists, if you want to define them in one sentence, in this cycle so far. There's plenty of money out there, it's just in the wrong hands. That's what Warren Wilhelm, as Bill de Blasio, has said.
Yes.
And that's what everybody on that stage believes. Or certainly they're proposing policies in furtherance of that statement.
Did we have a moment of silence, by the way, that he ended his presidential run?
We had it, the moment of silence equal to the popular support he was receiving before he...
Zero. His hashtag.
Before he decided to walk away from his campaign and focus his efforts on destroying New York City.
Right. That's what he's doing. He's coming home to the Big Apple.
Yeah. Congratulations, New York City denizens.
The state of Iowa.
But there's something Thiel is missing, and I know why he's missing it, because he doesn't really come from this perspective. But it's cultural Marxism as much as redistributionism and I would say more, actually, that's really driving... that's really the driving force on the left, and it's driving this presidential contest and all of those would-be Democrat nominees as well. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Roger Kimball, editor of the New Criterion, columnist for PJ Media, and...
Yes?
Roger Kimball, the newly minted Thomas L. Phillips Award recipient from the Fund for American Studies for his work in journalism. Roger, congratulations on that award. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Well, I went to the Fund for American Studies program, but I did the...
oh, did you?
I did the political and economic, the comparative political and economic systems, not the journalism piece.
Right.
So that's why I don't have the chops to write for New Criterion. So, Roger, what about what Peter Thiel had to say, and just a larger conversation about not underestimating the socialists? We're watching this play out, the deindustrialization of America proposal, the government takeover of healthcare and elimination of private health insurance proposal, so on and so forth. This is crazy. They're blowing themselves up. Don't underestimate them.
Yeah. Well, I think he's absolutely right. I, in my acceptance remarks for that, journalism dinner for the Fund for American Studies, I actually talk about socialism a little bit and note how bizarre it is that a philosophy and economic theory that has been more thoroughly discredited than any in history should be making a comeback not only among ignorant college students who, in their ignorance, believe that utopia is just around the corner, but also by members of Congress and presidential candidates, serious presidential candidates. Socialism is predicated on two fundamental goals. One is the redistribution of wealth, and the other is the abolition of private property. And a corollary to those goals is, of course, terror and a police state, because that's the only way you get those goals. I think of Bernie Sanders saying that were he president, he would prosecute fossil fuel executives for the damage they've done.
Right.
Well, what crime would he prosecute them for? There's no crime. But you see, the socialist doesn't need a crime. It's a crime against the people, the party, and so on. And I think Peter Thiel is absolutely right. I'd forgotten Marx's remark about interest rate. That's worth pondering. But as a broader thing, the revivification of the socialist mindset is really scary. I mean, we haven't seen this since the late 60s, early 70s, and I think it's in a way more serious now, because back in the 60s and 70s, it was mostly people from outside the corridors of power who were fomenting this sort of thing. Today, it's people on the inside. I mean, really on the inside. Major politicians, established organs of opinion, like that former paper of record in New York, whose name, like the name of the evil guy in Harry Potter, I won't say. But this is the establishment, and it's a combination. It is ignorance, but it's more than ignorance. It is malevolence, and you see how they deal with people who they disagree with, what they try to do to people like Brett Kavanaugh, what they do to President Trump's press secretary when she goes out to eat at a restaurant, what they do to people who are registered Trump donors in Texas. This is intolerance on steroids. And the idea that these people can call themselves liberals, of course, is it would be risible were it not so hypocritical. And I think Peter Thiel is absolutely right that we should not underestimate the new rise of socialist sentiment. It's very dangerous and really has to be nipped in the bud.
Since you brought up the New York Times and the Kavanaugh story, well, I'll say
I didn't bring up the New York
I know,
you
I
said it. You said NYT.
Well, I can't say gray lady. I don't know what to say. Jill Abramson, the former editor, was on with Harris Faulkner on Fox, and she was asked, well, how would you have handled the controversy? Number one, the bad copy editing, because it was just an innocent mistake.
It wasn't bad copy editing. It was entirely intentional. That's
right, but they played it off as just an oversight.
Right.
I'd love to hear what Jill Abramson would have done.
This is good stuff here. Wait till you hear the standard now for news that's fit to print.
Okay.
I think my move would have been the moves that the Times has made. I mean, no one has challenged the basic accuracy of the story that they published or of what's in the book. It's true that material fact was left out, and the Times ran an editor's note explaining that, which is what you do when you leave something out. But it was no conspiracy to, leave out that fact. It was, unfortunately cut from the piece, as I understand it.
That's just completely ridiculous. That story was it was a tissue of lies and misrepresentations from the very first letter. I mean, what this really was my second cousin's girlfriend's brother's high school roommate. Her cousin knew somebody who said that they saw Brett Kavanaugh do something in a college fraternity 35 years ago. That's the story. I mean, what was the main point of this story was that a guy who runs a nonprofit in Washington called Max Steer, no mention of the fact that he was one of Bill Clinton's lawyers. Oh. None of that. No mention that he's a Democratic operative.
Well, Jill Abramson. Jill Abramson. She addressed that because Harris Faulkner brought that up, and she said, "Well, I wouldn't call him a Democrat operative. He's done many things. It was like Pat Robertson. I'm not really. Right. I'm not a televangelist. I've mowed lawns. It was kind of one of those responses.
Yeah. No, it's ridiculous. And then it turns out, of course, that the woman who Max Steyer refers to has no memory of the event. They didn't mention that either. You know, and there are the 7 people who were corroborated. Well, that's not true either. I mean, Debbie Ramirez's mother, Kavanaugh, was never mentioned. Something happened at Yale. That's what she said to her mother. Something happened at Yale. That's, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything.
Abramson goes on to essentially say, in response to Faulkner's pressing the issue, and Harris Faulkner did a nice job.
Yeah.
She gives the Michael Wolff answer in terms of the news that's fit to print. She said, "You can't prove it's fiction. So if we can't prove it's fiction, that it's fit to print."
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, right. But that's what she said.
That's so irresponsible.
Yeah. I mean, people really should bear down on this story because it dramatizes in the most graphic possible way the utter intellectual, journalistic bankruptcy of this once great newspaper. It is nothing but a propaganda sheet for the far left wing of the Democratic Party. It is an anti-American megaphone that people should first laugh at and then ignore.
I wanted to get your take on another topic, some good news with respect to the President Trump's agenda and border security being at the top of it. Yesterday, Pentagon spokesman announcing that the $2.5 billion in contracts to construct a border wall along the southwest border in New Mexico and Arizona and California, about 130 miles. Those projects are green-lighted. All of the money has been obligated and is on contract. President Trump down at the southern border putting his John Hancock on a portion of the border wall. Does this constitute a campaign promise that has been kept?
Yes, that's another thing about President Trump. I stopped keeping track of this, but a year or so ago, I kind of totted up the promises that he had made and the promises that he'd kept. It's a very long list. I can't think of another president that has done what everything from moving our embassy in Israel to Jerusalem to the regulatory environment, the appointment of judges and nomination of responsible Supreme Court justices. It's a very long list. And of course, those promises he hasn't been able to keep are because of Democratic opposition. I mean, the border we'd be much further along with this were the Democrats not trying to stymie him at every turn. So I think a week is a long time in politics, as the British Prime Minister Harold Wilson once said. But if things continue as they have been going, Donald Trump is not just going to win; he is going to crush the Democratic Party, and there will be the kind of smoldering ruins that will be left.
Roger Kimball, editor of the New Criterion, columnist for PJ Media, and again, Thomas L. Phillips Award recipient from the Fund for American Studies. Congratulations again on that. Roger, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Yeah.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're talking about it, Dan and Amy are talking about it. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Message and data rates may apply. Individual results may vary. Exclusions apply.
But hey, I'm buying a huge flat